Following the recent spread of documents highlighting their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, Disney is being sued for alleged discrimination against white men. That alleged bit is purely legal disclaimer. As we're about to see in this very video, this is what Disney does. The lawsuit against Disney comes from America First Legal, which claims that Disney is violating Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 by engaging in illegal race, sex, and national origin discrimination. Specifically, the AFL lawsuit is alleging that Disney's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts amounts to illegal discrimination against white American men, including Jews, and it cites the memo from the Walt Disney Company that breaks down the inclusion standards, which ensures that so-called underrepresented groups will be wildly overrepresented, while both the number of positions and even career prospects for any white male is severely capped, specifically because they're white and male. This lawsuit is timely, as we have covered this very topic in recent videos, following the excellent reporting of Chris Gore and Alan Ng over at Film Threat. As a matter of fact, just hours before this lawsuit was filed, they released a new chapter in their D-Files series, which documents the fall of Disney Animation and the beginning of anti-white discrimination within Disney. You can find both their original report as well as our earlier videos covering them in the description, but to briefly get everyone up to speed. We last saw how John Lasseter's replacements, like Jennifer Lee, decided that in the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion, 50% of Disney's animators had to be female, even though there do not exist enough qualified female animators in America to reach that goal. You see, the vast overwhelming majority of those who choose to pursue an education in animation and thus attain the qualifications and certifications necessary to work for Disney are overwhelmingly male and white male at that. Not because anyone else are being kept out, mind you, far from it, but because, as a general thing, that is who tends to commit to such an education. And so, the pool of qualified animation talent is also overwhelmingly male and white male at that. Purely by individual choice, the pool of qualified talent is such that even if Disney were to hire every single woman in it, there just aren't many enough of them to fill half of the animation positions at Disney. And so, in order to meet that arbitrary goal of 50% female representation among animators, even though not enough women are interested in acquiring the necessary qualifications that it even can be reached, Disney did what DEI doctrine requires them to do. That is, they threw the qualification requirements for women out the window and started recruiting complete and total amateurs from the likes of social media outlets like Tumblr and Reddit. The only remaining qualification requirement for those women was that they were female, later changed to identifying as female, that they had the most basic mastery of animation programs, and, as we saw the last time, that the organization Women in Animation made sure of, that they were radical man-hating commies. And if they weren't, if they had some level of independent thought, or worse yet, Chairman Mao forbid, some conservative leanings like Gina Carano, then, as we saw in the previous video, Women in Animation would see to it that those women were blacklisted and banned from ever entering animation in the first place. Thus, in the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion, Disney Animation was filled up with a new breed of young female radical activists who were quoted in, and who did not have the necessary qualifications to actually do the job. The article reads, "When the new animators entered the hallowed halls of Disney Animation, the veteran staff instantly knew trouble was brewing. The first warning sign was the quality of their work or lack thereof. Who's Walt Disney? Walt Disney himself inspired the work of these veterans. They studied Walt's classic features and shorts. That's how they got their jobs at Disney. But that was not so with these new recruits. They understood very little about actual animation and bringing art to life. Film Threat Source said that their influences were not from Walt, but from whatever was currently popular with Gen Z and millennials at the time, which in this case was anime, a very different art form and style. When asked about the classics like Snow White, Dumbo, and The Jungle Book, their response was blank stares. When these recruits started doing their highly coveted jobs, they struggled to succeed at jobs they weren't qualified to have in the first place. Attempts to offer help or mentoring from the old white guys were met with an undeniable cold shoulder. One veteran animator described the new hires as having open disdain for the old white guys. Comments that veterans made during creative meetings were met with snarky replies by the youngsters. In other words, representation had increased, but at the expense of quality and certainly of work environment. But there was still one big problem standing in the way of achieving 50% female representation among Disney animators, namely that there were still too many qualified and experienced animators of the male and hated white persuasion already working there. In the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion, they just had to go, and that brings us to the meat of this article. Disney could not reach 50-50 male-female equity without clearing out the old white guys. They needed to go, and outright firing them was not an option. Because you see, that would be illegal, and while Disney and every other company under the sun that does engage in DEI engage in practices that are blatantly illegal, they do try to conceal that fact. For instance, they can't ask someone about their race or sexual orientation, which is why Writers Guild members are heavily pushed to self-report on this, so that the likes of Disney can find that data in a database without asking the individual in question. Similarly, in Disney animation, they won't fire anyone for being white, but they will bully and harass white people so they quit on their own. The scoop continues. The tactic was simple. First exasperate and then attack. It started with demotions for the old white guys in an attempt to demoralize them. The targets were given mundane and inconsequential scenes to work on, regardless of their vast experience. Scraps for the dogs. Second, if they questioned or complained about their assignment, they were given impossible scenes to work on in an impossible amount of time. When the work was turned in, the new emboldened recruits harshly criticized their work to the point of humiliation. The goal was to make life so miserable that they'd quit or be forced to fall in line with a new normal. If that didn't work, something worse was waiting in the wings. Mostly, and sadly, the tactics worked. The effort to remove or control the old white guys was effective, and the activists began to hunker down. As the young millennial and Gen Z artist activists began filling quickly vacated positions, their behavior was emboldened. These recruits had an advocate in the organization Women in Animation. At this point, Women in Animation was becoming a powerful player in animation. Their leadership was filling prominent executive positions at all the major studios as well as within the Animation Guild. Being the resource that they were, the female recruits had access to lectures on gender and social issues on the Women in Animation website. These lectures included how to handle situations where you feel uncomfortable at the studio, discussions on how to be heard at staff meetings, seen at creative meetings, and how to rise through the ranks of leadership quickly. In short, everything you needed to have a successful career without animation entering the conversation, which is ironic as A in Women in Animation stands for animation. The toxicity of the Tumblr and Reddit forums now invaded all corners of Disney animation. These new activist recruits were being groomed to be office bullies. They were actively encouraged to expose inappropriate office culture behavior and report it to HR. They were proactively looking for men and non-compliant females to complain about, all under the guise of making a more healthy working environment. Spies were everywhere in the office, and you didn't know who was listening to your conversation or where they were lurking. Question: wasn't there a time not so long ago when citizens were asked to spy and report on their problematic neighbors? Soon there was an effort to root out the infidels. All meetings opened with the gentle encouragement that this is a safe space. It meant everyone was free to talk over any issues and be heard. I'd like to chime in here that the implied meaning is that the space is safe for the diverse workforce, not for the white men or non-compliant women. They were seen as the enemies others needed to be kept safe from, and once they quit or were fired in HR hit jobs, the article details that they would instantly go on a blacklist, managed by women in animation, who would ensure that the white men and non-compliant women wouldn't get any animation work anywhere else, so they would be forced to leave the industry altogether in order to sustain themselves and their families. But with anyone of talent, experience and qualifications gradually being shunned out of Disney and the animation industry at large, what did this do for quality? Well, the article reads, and referencing where this new, diverse pool of talent came from, social media isn't exactly the breeding ground for building a healthy community and interpersonal interactions. Tumblr communities foster an echo chamber effect where certain ideas or ideologies are reinforced without much critical discussion or diversity of thought. Relevant here is a new form of woke storytelling where villains are no longer needed or female protagonists don't need no man to save them.
You said you were bringing a modern edge to it on stage. What do you mean by that?
I just mean that it's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be.
Tumblr became the perfect breeding ground for activists, perfect for Disney's new reimagined storytelling. These recruits had a very specific personality. In them, Disney found their value as influencers, not artists. As one source puts it, Disney was more than ready to hire influencers than a more reserved person with actual talent. Influencers have the potential to bring in their fanbase to replace whatever old fanbase was there before. Unfortunately, Disney gave these influencers too much credit to do exactly that. In other words, Disney overestimated their artistic talent and underestimated their ability to attract an audience. And that would be why the younger, modern audience Disney and the rest of Hollywood have catered to these last few years never emerged. In the name of diversity, equity and inclusion, they handed the keys to the Magic Kingdom over to lunatics who are so few and far between that they had to be actively recruited from the worst cesspool social media has to offer. That's how you get movies like Wish and Strange World and even the Marvels and everything we've gotten from Lucasfilm this past decade, because this isn't restricted to just Disney animation. Spearheading this though, Jennifer Lee may have ruined animation in not just Disney, but America at large. The real culprit here though, at least where Disney is concerned, is Bob Iger. What he has done to Disney, and the toxicity that he, through Disney, has helped unleash upon the world, will be his true legacy. We will keep you up to date as the story unfolds, both the lawsuit and future D-Files revelations. Please subscribe so you don't miss out. For now though, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comments.